let's dive into a really powerful little story. A parable about perspective that might just change the way you look at, well, everything. It's called Be the Lake. So, we're going to start with the big question this story really gets at. Why is it that the exact same problem can absolutely shatter one person, but someone else can face it and barely even flinch? I mean, you've seen it, right? We all have. One person gets a little bit of bad news and their whole world just seems to fall apart. But then you see someone else get hit with a genuine disaster and they handle it with this incredible calm. What's going on there? What's the secret? Well, the secret isn't about the size of the problem. It never was. It's about the size of the container we're holding it in. You see, if your perspective, your heart, is small and tight, even a tiny issue can feel like the end of the world. But if your heart is vast, you can absorb even the biggest challenges without being overwhelmed. To really get this, let me introduce you to the hero of our story. He's a young man who just felt completely crushed by life. To him, it was just one sad thing after another. For him, it all began with this constant humming anxiety in the background of everything he did. It was just always there. On top of that, he couldn't find a job. And that just piled on this heavy feeling of financial stress and, a sense of failure. And as if all that wasn't enough to deal with, he was getting immense pressure from his family. They wanted him to succeed, to be someone he just felt he couldn't be. So you take all of that, the anxiety, the unemployment, the pressure, and it all snowballed into this deep, paralyzing fear of what was coming next. He was absolutely convinced that nothing would ever work out for him. So there he is, sitting in a cafe one day, pretty much ready to give up on everything. And he overhears a conversation. Two older men talking about a wise man who lived up in the hills. A man, they said, whose words could actually change your life. And just like that, a tiny little spark of hope was lit. So desperate for any kind of answer, the young man makes the journey and finds this wise man. He just pours his heart out, explaining all his pain. The wise man, he just listens, totally silent. And then the lesson began, but not with words. What the wise man did was give him an experience. First, he took a handful of salt and stirred it into a small cup of water, telling the young man to drink. It was awful, right? Unbearably salty. Then, he took the exact same handful of salt and walked over to a huge, beautiful lake and just threw it in. He told the young man to drink from the lake, and this time, the water was fresh, clean. The salt was gone. See? Same amount of pain, just a totally different container. So now, with this simple but really powerful experiment finished, the wise man finally started to speak. He was ready to explain the deep wisdom behind what the young man had just seen for himself. And here it is. This is the whole idea in a nutshell. Pain is just a part of life. It's like salt. The amount of it doesn't really change. But the bitterness, the suffering we feel, that completely depends on the container we decide to put it in. It depends on our perspective. You can almost think of it like an equation for your life. If you take life's unavoidable pain, that's the salt, and you mix it with a small, narrow perspective, that's the cup, what you get is bitterness. You get sorrow. But if you take that same amount of pain and you put it into a broad, expansive perspective, the lake, the result is totally different. You get peace. You get calm. This is really where our suffering comes from. It's not the pain itself. It's when we let that pain become our entire world. Our mind shrinks down to the size of that tiny cup. And of course, all we can taste is this salt. Okay, so this is a great story, but how do we actually use this? How do we apply this wisdom when we're the ones feeling overwhelmed? Here's the deal. When you're facing something hard, you have a choice. You can't always avoid the pain. In fact, that's often how we grow. But you can choose to expand your capacity to handle it. You can consciously work to widen your perspective, to stretch your patience, and to refuse to let a single problem become your whole reality. So the message is simple. Don't be the cup. Don't let your heart, your mind, your entire spirit become small and cramped. Don't let your focus get so narrow that a single handful of salt is the only thing you can taste. Instead, when pain arrives, the goal is to expand. Widen your sense of self, your sense of time, what you're grateful for. Become vast. Become the lake. Because when you do, you'll discover that the same salt of life just doesn't taste so bitter anymore. So the real question is, what's one small way you can start expanding your own container starting today?